Welcome to another exciting episode of Carving the Divine TV. My name is Yujiro Seki. I'm a director, writer, and the producer of the documentary Carving the Divine. Carving the Divine is about the Buddhist sculptors of Japan, and I'm ready to present it for the first time in the world. But before I do so, I thought it would be a great idea to introduce basic concept of Buddhism and the history of Buddhism so that when you guys finally watch my documentary, you guys can watch it at the maximum value. So today he's back. I'm very grateful for him to take time to come back to talk to us. We don't know anything about the Buddhist spirituality, so we want to ask him more questions. So welcome back again, Mr. Mark Schumacher. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Great. So yes, just in case people who don't know anything about you, please briefly introduce yourself.
I'm a longtime resident of Japan. I live here for over half of my life in the medieval capital, the 12th century capital of Japan, which is where I fell in love with Japanese Buddhist statuary. And I've been studying it for nearly 25 years.
Beautiful. So thank you very much for that. So yes, today we would like to ask you, who's Busshi? So my documentary is about the Buddhist sculptors of Japan, and in Japanese, those people are called Busshi. But I want to know from an art historian point of view, who Busshi is and who was Busshi. Please tell us.
Okay, essentially, Busshi is the Japanese pronunciation of a Chinese term, which literally translated means Buddha teacher. But that's not necessarily how it's commonly translated. It's commonly translated as someone who makes Buddhist statuary. And the term first appeared in Japan in 623 of the Common Era. And we know this because there's a statue at Horyuji in Nara, which is one of Japan's oldest temples. There's a statue there, and in the halo of the statue is carved Tori Busshi, which this was the name of the man who carved or who made the statue was Tori, and then he signed his name Busshi, Buddha teacher. And ever since then, the term has been used for people who make Buddhist statuary. Okay. Now, it can also be used for people who paint Buddhist paintings, or it can be used for any number of artistic specialties, divisions of labor, people who work with jewelry in Buddhism, people who work with painting the statues, people who work with wood. They all are called Busshi, okay? They all can be called Busshi. Now, what happens now is that around the 7th century, government-sponsored workshops were established in Japan to produce Buddhist statues for the imperial court and the nobility. And this is where all the Busshi worked. And inside of these workshops, there was always the master Busshi, the headmaster, and then there were always the apprentice and the assistant Busshi, okay? And I think your film, Carving the Divine, really shows us with the Grand Master and then his student, who then has all these younger apprentices that he's teaching. And so the Grand Master Busshi is called the Dai Busshi, the big guy, right? And the apprentices and the assistant Busshi are called the Sho Busshi, or the underlings. So Dai Busshi, Sho Busshi. Then it's also interesting to note that around the end of the 8th century, the government stopped its state-sponsored workshops. And all of the Busshi then had to leave and find new work. And so many of them found new work by working for temple workshops, or they opened up their own independent workshops. Now, during this time was also very interesting. The Daibushi, the headmaster, the guy on the top, the best maker of statues, was considered a monk. And he was also given the rank of high priest. Now, he did not perform or carry out religious rituals. This was just an honorific title given to carvers of Buddhist statuary in medieval Japan to show their very high status in society. The carving people had a very high status in society. But then in the Muromachi period, around the 15th century, they ended this system of giving special status to the Busshi. And so the Busshi then became just general artisans. They were classified as just general artisans. They lost their special social status. And then by the Meiji period, the whole system of the Daibushi and the Shobushi, the system of the headmaster and all the apprentices and assistants, that was abandoned as well. So we have a situation today, which you probably know more than I do, that the Busshi today are probably independent artisans who need to go out and find temples and people to, they do repairs for the temples, or they make a new statue for the temple, or they're making statues for I don't know who, but it must be a very tough life because they've lost their official status. They no longer have these state-sponsored workshops. And the temples, I'm not sure how much work they can get from the temples. And the other big question I have to you is, I kind of worry about this, is these days, it's happening. 3D printing has come along. And some of the temples have now done the 3D laser imaging of their treasures, their Buddhist treasures. And they're making replicas of their treasures. And then these replicas are being sent, to museums outside of Japan or in Japan, or they're being sold. And so if 3D printing technology, which can make stuff in wood, stone, plastic resin, many other materials, if 3D imaging can produce, and 3D printing can produce a perfect replica of ancient treasures, what's going to happen to our real human artisans who make the statues?
That's a very scary thought. You're right about that. The only thing that I would say is, Busshi statues that Busshi make in Japan, they don't use sandpaper. They only use chisels to make these statues. It's very time consuming, and it takes a lot of skills and hours and all this. I don't know how much 3D printer can do that, but possibly they could be at that level. So I have no idea, but right now it's hard for me to imagine that they can do something like Busshi does. But at the same time, also, I was told by people that, ancient statues, Japanese ancient statues are more than just the statues. They have some feelings inside. You can feel it when they see them, when people see them. So these kind of feelings, I don't know if a 3D printer can reproduce that as well. That's I would like to say about that.
Well, essentially I agree with what you said. These statues are not dead. They're living icons. These ancient treasures, they're living icons. And in many cases, the temple authorities will not allow for 3D printing or 3D lasering. So those are safe. Smaller temples, however, they think their treasures are slowly deteriorating, falling apart. they're more willing to use the 3D than some of the, the national treasures of Japan. And so most temples won't allow it, I'm sure. Even some of those temples have never allowed us to take x-rays to find out if there's something inside of the statues, right? A lot of the treasures in Japan, we know, have scrolls hidden inside. They have smaller statues hidden inside. They have who commissioned the statues and all these different kinds of offerings inside the statue. And we already know this through CT scanning and X-ray, but for many of the great treasures in Japan, the temple authorities refuse to allow us to examine the statues in this way. So those statues will never be 3D printed. Sure.
Yeah, but I agree. It's scary that those printers could replace human beings, and there won't be any more Busshi. So that sounds horrible. So
well, then the other scary thing to me is in Japan now, modernized Japan, and you can make, for example, here's a little 3D printed plastic guy of one of the four guardians of the four directions. More and more of these types of little statues will be sold, made out of plastic or made out of wood or made out of any number of materials.
Right.
And the current Busshi, who make a living by making such statuary, will be out of work. So I'm kind of worried about the future for the profession. There will always be work to repair the existing statuary in the temples. There will always be work for this. But how many people will that support? How big of a, how many Busshi will exist 50 years from now? It's very scary. It's a wonderful skill. It's a hard life. You got to be passionate. But you can see the love in those statues. You could feel the love in those statues made by hand.
I agree. So that one of the missions of Carving the Divine is to tell people how wonderful this tradition is, and not let that machine takes over human beings. And it's not. I'm not gonna let the Terminator destroy our culture, so to speak. So yeah. So you mentioned about the Dai Busshi, but as far as I didn't know that all that ancient history behind the Dai Busshi, but nowadays I feel like a Dai Busshi is basically the special title somebody gets. It's not. Some people get it, some people don't, and in order for somebody to get it, so you gotta be skillful, but at the same time, in Japan, often you gotta be older. If you're a young kid, so you're too young for that. So that's what I experienced. So when I was seeing Buddhist sculptors of Japan, Busshi, often they were skillful enough, but they were too young to receive Dai Busshi. So
is there a national Busshi organization that gives this title, Dai Busshi? Who gives the title?
Well, that's basically temples. Each temple.
Okay.
Yeah. And there's some like a bureaucracy behind, and I don't want to get into details, but you gotta have a good relationship with the temple, and you gotta exhibit the Bushi's work there, and so you cannot be just skillful and master to become a Bushi. Often living in Japan is a lot more than being skillful, but you gotta be master of negotiator. So that's what I experienced. So beautiful.
Well, the other I forgot to mention earlier is when Buddhism was introduced to Japan, which is like around 500 560, 550 Common Era. The Japanese, of course, didn't know anything about Buddhism, and they didn't know how to carve statues. So in the very first 100, 150 years in Japan, most statues and the skill of becoming a Busshi were passed down from Koreans and Chinese people who had lived here and grown up here. And that is where the skill set originally was passed on to the Japanese. And then, of course, by the 7th century, now already then, we have a very, very skilled Japanese artisans.
Beautiful. Thank you very much. So we want to go into details in a later episode, but for now, we want to finish this episode. So yes, before we finish, please tell us your website. So we want to know more about these deities. How can I get more information?
It's just very simple. Just go to Onmark Productions with an S, onmarkproductions.com. Once you get to the opening screen, there's a picture of a Buddha. Just click that and off you go. It's all organized A to Z. And there's a search box, and you can search to your heart's content. Lots and lots and lots of annotated photographs, which you will find useful in planning any trip you might want to take to Japan. So you'll know where to go to find the deities.
Great, great. So if you guys think this information is useful, make sure to subscribe my YouTube channel, follow me on Twitter and Instagram, and like me on my Facebook, because that's how we do it in the 21st century. Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Mr. Mark. Thank you.